Good morning to everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. We are pleased to have everyone with us. We're extremely sorry for the delay owing to technical issues. Well, I'm Anton Thayalan, the Chief Evangelist for Luminary Learning Solutions, and I will be the voice of the webinar this morning. We welcome you to a new and improved Season 3 of Reset and Go, in continuation with Saturdays are for Learning with Luminary. We present Revive and Thrive. As the saying goes, gear up and get your learning on. Today's segment of Revive and Thrive, we will discuss working from home to working from anywhere, an exchange of real experiences and validated ideas on which to leverage your success and truly thrive. Our subject matter experts this morning, and we are truly honored to have on the panel today Romani Rupasinghe, Head of Engineering, Swivel Group; Ganaka Herath, Managing Partner, McKinsey and Company, Sri Lanka; and Shenail Guneratne, Human Resources Business Partner, London Stock Exchange Group. Steering the conversation this morning is Zafrana Nafeez, a trainer with Luminary Learning Solutions. On that note, over to you, Zafrana.
Thank you, Anton, and good morning, everyone. Last season, Revive and Grow, we discussed about working from home and how to be productive. At that time, organizations from all sizes and industries were forced to adapt to work from home, whether or not they were ready. It all came unannounced and is unlikely to leave anytime soon. This is the new normal, and we got to be ready. And I guess this is the perfect time to have this conversation, working from home to working from anywhere. So let me start with the obvious question. Are companies and individuals truly ready to accept this reality? What are your thoughts? Shall we start with Shenail?
Yeah, thank you, Zafrana. So thank you for having me today as well. And I think, like you very rightly mentioned, this is sort of a phenomenon that, took everyone by surprise. And, we've been in this for the last 8 months, actually. And I think, when people started off, there was some resistance from employees and, even personally for us, it was all difficult for us to embrace this new ways of working. But I think 8 months down the line, even companies and the employees themselves have learned to kind of adapt to what this is. And I think on the topic which we have today, which is working from anywhere, I think for me personally, the definition on this would be, you could be working from home, you could be working from the office sometimes, you can also be working out of another location that's not your home, but it's somewhere close to your, relatives, or, somewhere that you feel is a comfort level for you to keep working. So I feel that, organizations have really adapted to this approach, and employees also are learning, new skills in terms of how to work in this new environment. And personally, I've been really proud to be a part of an organization that has been really resilient in this time. And I feel, they've been able to embrace a lot of the different approaches to give necessary support from an overall group perspective as well. So I think to your question, definitely yes. I think, people are moving towards seeing that, we can't, get away from this. This is going to be a part of our day-to-day work lives in the future as well.
What are your thoughts, Ganaka?
Thank you, Zafrana. Look, I think fully agree, right? It's been quite a journey for the last 7 months. But if I think through each of the elements that need to be in place for working remotely, working from anywhere to be successful, in my mind, there is like 6 big areas, right? One is there's a cultural shift that needs to take place, no matter which company you were working at. If you didn't have a significant amount of remote working already happening, there's a cultural shift that needs to take place. There's a technology enablement, and that actually changes between, if you say, from working from home to working from anywhere, right? Because technology, the technology piece is not just about whatever kit you're using to connect, but also around you have access to a single source of data and a single source of truth. That's very important. Otherwise, you and a team member could be working on two different bits of data, two different bits of a problem. You need to have a process in place, and then you need to have security around that, right? So remote working poses more challenges in terms of security. And then you want to probably wrap that whole thing in a test and learn kind of environment. So each of culture, structure, technology, you're working on and improving as you go along. Now, I think we've come a long way on all of those dimensions, but I think if you're really thinking about how to get to great, there's still a long way to go for many, many companies. And I think that's particularly true for Sri Lanka, because we have been somewhat isolated from the total impact of COVID until at least the second wave took place, right? And the numbers are quite stunning. If you think about what's happened in the last 7 months, I love this one statistic, right? Disney Plus has done in 2 months what it took Netflix 7 years to do. Right? That's the pace of change that we're going through at the moment. And we are somewhat isolated from that, right? Our digital, our use of digital is not as high as it used to be, or it could be. So I think it's going to be quite important that Sri Lanka starts really thinking about, if you're going to get the maximum out of working from home, you've come a long way. There's still a long way to go.
Great. So like Romani said, like Shenail said, working from anywhere it is now that we have to accept. And I love how Ganaka pointed out different aspects of it when it comes to working from home. So in these aspects, like Ganaka said, from cultural shift to technology, there are so many challenges that we face, is it? So 8 months ago, the challenges that the companies and the employees had are completely different to even the challenges that they face today. So what is your experience of how do you see of the challenges that we face today when it comes to working remotely? Ganaka, would you like to start?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, I think you're right. I think the challenges themselves are probably the same, but our emphasis is changing, right? I know when we were right at the beginning of the first lockdown, my biggest challenge was could the internet connectivity be stable consistently on Zoom, so that I can be having discussions with clients, right? Without missing words and so on. Now redundancies are in place. I'm very comfortable with that, even though connectivity to Teams this morning was a bit challenging. But so that was, we were thinking about problems like that. Now I am thinking about a completely different set of challenges. Is in a remote working model, the apprenticeship model that we use at McKinsey, is that being as effectively delivered through a remote setup as it would be if we were in person, right? Again, that problem existed 9 months ago as well. My emphasis on that problem has changed. So, and there are quite interesting pieces. When we first went remote, the firm McKinsey put a lot of research into what it was going to be that would be our set of protocols for working remotely, right? And we always say, if you're in a Zoom meeting, you have to have your camera on, right? And I was talking to a colleague, and she was consistently not turning her camera on. And I was like, why is that? Like, my home environment is not conducive for me to turn the camera on. So you don't even think about things like that, right? So, equally, if there are kids around, how are we able to give the right kind of mind space to the work we're doing, or many other kind of intermittent challenges that weren't probably our top focus 9 months ago, but now are becoming increasingly important if you want to get the best productivity out of working remotely. So I think the challenges are shifting, or the focus on challenges are shifting. And I think it's going to be quite interesting to see how we figure out particularly some of those elements in Sri Lanka.
Shenail, how about you?
Yeah, so I think to add on to Ganaka's point, I think if I look at the challenges in kind of a summary, I would say it would be mainly around well-being. communication and connection. So, the well-being piece, which Ganaka brought out a bit as well, in terms of, each person's working environment is kind of different, and, their ability to work in that, new office space at home or anywhere else would be something challenging. So we've seen, a lot of employees needing support in terms of the well-being aspects of, changing from being in that office space where you had everyone around you, when you needed to kind of speak to someone, it was just, walking up to another desk. But today, all these things, you're kind of like isolated. You may have, your family and your other priorities to manage. So we see a lot of employees struggling with, creating those boundaries around what work is and what home is, right? So a lot of feedback that we've got is, usually when you travel to work, when you leave work, there's some sort of a, end that comes there to say, oh, now I'm off work. But obviously there were people who work after that as well. But now it's basically like, it's a couple of feet away, right? You work from, say, your dining table, you go have your lunch or your dinner, a couple of feet away. And that kind of doesn't really give you that direct boundary to say, this is work, this is home. So I think that aspect is one of the key challenges we've seen a lot of employees kind of struggle with. And as organizations, we've been supporting all of that through different initiatives as well. And the connection piece, I think, is something that, all employees, although they kind of took it for granted maybe when we were in the work environment, realized that all of us need that human connection, that engagement with other employees as well. So we're seeing that coming out a lot, especially from the younger employees who really like, having those little activities and those breaks from work. So we've tried to convert a lot of those initiatives to a virtual environment to support employees with that as well. And I think communication is another aspect that, we've probably not thought of too much until, COVID kind of hit us, and the importance of senior leaders communicating constantly with employees, having those check-ins, internal communications playing such an important role in getting messages across, knowing which tool to use for what kind of environment. So you would need to have meetings when, you would need to have, a team chat when. So you kind of need to have those balances in terms of the, tools that you would use. So I would say, companies really need to, focus on these areas. They're doing a lot, but there's further improvements that can be done and worked on as well. And we'll see new challenges coming up over the next couple of, months and years, actually, when we go into this model further.
Interesting. Thank you, Shenail, for addressing even what can companies do to really address these challenges. Something interesting that I caught from what Ganaka said about the lady not switching on the camera. See, I think a lot of people have this challenge, right? When you're representing your company at a meeting, and when you have kids around, they'll be howling around, screaming. How do you maintain the professionalism in that sort of sense? Will the companies excuse? Should the companies excuse that sort of disturbances, or should company, put some sort of a framework as to what is acceptable and what is not? How can both parties deal with this?
Do you want to? Let me jump in.
Yes, please. Yeah. Please. You had the experience.
Yeah. Look, I think the truth, as always, as with many things, is somewhere in between those 2 points, right? I don't think you can not accept that working from home means that you're at home, right? Working from anywhere means that you're in a place that is not essentially as professional as the office environment. So there is an adjustment that needs to take place. I'll give you an example. I was I was doing a webinar for top 20 CEOs, and my dog decided to come and just get on my lap all of a sudden. I'm not expecting it at all. What can you do, right? You apologize and you go on. It's unfortunate, but at the end of the day, I don't think that something like that really detracts. On the other hand, if what's going on is detracting in terms of your mind space and your ability to focus and deliver what you're meant to do, that's a different set of challenges. So in that sense, some levels of processes, controls do need to be in place. Particularly, I work in professional services, and that's quite important. So the truth, I think, lies somewhere in between. But companies, I think, need to go further than that, right? If you give a good example, before COVID, when I used to get up in the morning, whatever time that may be, I go through my communications, right? I'd probably take a break and I'd start with my comms. If I think about the volume of communications that I get today, it's gone up exponentially. That's because, there are so many WhatsApp groups that have, I dread looking at my WhatsApp. It's like 1,100 messages. I always didn't realize that's that popular. So communication is a communication overload, right? So I think companies really need to think through and say, what channel are we going to use for what? So we almost have a system where we say, emails are now only for particular types of escalation. We use other kind of fully online channels like Slack if we want to do more regular communications between teams. So increasing the frequency of communications, but reducing kind of the density of the comms. And we've actually thought about, okay, so this is what this channel, this type of comms. And that actually helps streamline communications quite significantly. So companies need to start thinking about elements like that as well.
Interesting. Ganaka touched on the employer side of, how they could manage that aspect of what I asked. Shenail, do you like to shed some light from the employee's point of view? How can they deal with such situations, working in different surroundings and in terms of dealing, maintaining the professionalism?
Yeah, so I think some of the strategies, that we have kind of put in place is that we as an organization, and I think many other organizations as well, I've seen, there have been case studies on companies even like Microsoft, but, locally from my experience, I can say at LSEG, the organization themselves has kind of, set that in between standard where managers and leaders understand that, every employee is not going to have an office environment that's going to be the same out of their home as well, because there are going to be disturbances from children, from pets, from spouses. It can be from various elements, and that's okay. So, people don't need to feel ashamed of it. A part of it is to, make employees feel comfortable, say, oh, if, a kid jumps in there, you might say, oh, would you, if it's that type of a setting, you can even, if it's the team meeting, you can say, would you like to introduce the person, make a joke out of it and make the employees feel comfortable and not something that, they are afraid of in that kind of environment. I understand that might not work, in every situation if you're having an external meeting and, it's a different type of audience that you're catering to. But in those kind of instances, I think as an organization, if we set, the standards straight as well with our employees, and we put forward our values in the organization, which the employees then embrace and understand that there is some sort of leverage that the organization gives to them because they are working from home, but give them that comfort level to say, you have a responsibility at the start of it. Your line manager will guide and support you through it, and the organization will provide you that ecosystem that makes you feel comfortable to work out of that place. So I think it's actually sort of everyone coming into the place and the employee saying, I have a responsibility to be professional, and I'm being given this flexibility from the organizations. So therefore, I take this responsibility from me, and I live the values of the organization, and I behave in a professional manner while I have guidance and support from the organization and my line managers. So I think all of that kind of comes into play to support this process.
Thank you for that, Shenail. So yes, so it's from both parties, is it? As much as we have challenges, there are also certain risks associated in remote working, right? For example, the files that are being accessed from unsecured networks, because we're talking about not only working from home, working from anywhere. So they could be working at co-sharing, workspaces, cafes. They're having constant conversations on the phone. So, people could hear sensitive information, be it people at home, be it at a cafe, you're on a meeting. So your sensitive information could be heard by others. You're also accessing to your files through networks that may or may not be secured. So what can organizations do to ensure that these risks are minimized? Do they have policies, or what should they do about it?
Yeah, so Safran, I think I'll start off on this one. So from an organization perspective, I think when we went into sort of this work from anywhere or work from home model, one of the key things was to educate employees in terms of understanding what these policies are. So in our organization, there are a couple of areas which we've looked at. So at the start of it, when there are new joiners coming in, from the induction stage itself, the importance of the info security policies, all of that is kind of, communicated to the employees clearly, and they're told, the impact of what could happen if there is such a breach in the organization as well. And we also do have periodic trainings for the employees to understand this, where, subject matter experts would come forward. We even had something like an InfoSec week, which was about cybersecurity and, the importance in terms of what employees need to focus on and what their responsibility is in terms of this, and in terms of confidentiality of data and the parts that they need to do, focus on. We've had different mandatory learnings, which, overall in the group you would go through in terms of important elements for employees to be aware of. So they would always think twice before they, engage in something. And definitely there are policies and procedures if there is a fail or a lapse in it, where, that will be picked up as separate actions as well. So I think educating the employees is one of those really important factors, and then having the necessary policies and procedures within the organization to make sure that, the full circle is kind of covered through that process as well.
Ganaka, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, fully endorse what Shenail just said, right? It is this dual balance between what the company can do versus the employee. But on cyber in particular, and if I take cyber to take the whole gamut of data and technology risk, right? Putting it all in one. More and more, I think the technology elements exist and can be deployed easily, whether it be through a VPN, which prevents you from being on, unduly exposed on a public network, right? But cyber in particular requires a real cultural shift in organizations, because, at the end of the day, you can put the best technology infrastructure in place for security, but the human element is where massive risk is introduced. Phishing is still the most common way for someone to get your password, right? It's not to hack you, it's to basically use a phishing attempt and then use that information. So as Shenail was saying, a cultural piece around you as the employee now need to really own that risk and be constantly thinking about it, right? No matter what we have in place as policies, if you are, if you're comfortable taking risks and not putting your VPN on, that element, just imposes too much risk into this whole system. So that the piece around getting your employees, getting that culture around security set correctly is very important.
Yes, thank you for that thoughts. There's another area that I would like to focus on. So apart from all these challenges and the risk that somebody could face working from home, now that you're at home, people have a bit more of flexibility, right? So people tend to pursue on their own passion for side hustles. Generally, when you're working from office, chances are that you will spend less time on those, be it programming, be it a copywriter, or simply baking cakes. When you're at office, there's a certain amount of restriction that you would have to do something on your own for to a side hustle. So my question is, A, can there be conflicts of interest? B, even if there's no conflict of interest, how do you deal with this? Because you can't see the employee, and how do you draw the line, and how do you address this sort of issue?
So can there be conflicts of interest? Of course. I think that's every time you're on Facebook instead of doing work, it's somewhat of a conflict of interest. But I think it's important for us to understand that we are shifting away from, and this had started well before COVID. COVID has just further accelerated shift away from managing employees by activity versus managing employees by outcome, right? If you're managing by activity, then you have a problem, right? You need to know how much time they're spending writing the copyright versus something else. But when you shift to managing by outcome, that's a completely different thing. It's up to the employee to manage their time as long as they meet the outcome. Now, not all work is conducive to that approach. Not all employees are conducive to that approach. Earlier on, you may need actually to manage through activity to help people understand how to get to an outcome. So you need to find a balance, I think, between those two.
Shenail, would you like to add to that, maybe from both point of views?
Yeah, so I think similar to what Ganaka said, there is going to be conflicts of interest, and I think we cannot stop, people having the other activities in addition to their usual work as well. And I think some of it stems down to the organization having that trust with the employee, similar to what Ganaka said in terms of looking at the outcome. So I don't need you to be sitting at the desk from 9 to 5, but if you do get your work done, in terms of what outcomes you need to deliver for your customer, for your stakeholder, I think that is the most important piece there. And in terms of conflict of interest, I think as organizations, it is our duty to inform employees in terms of what some of those guidelines would be. So what would a conflict of interest be like? And in LSEG as well, we do have a system where if you are going into something, additional, which even if there is an income from it or anything, if it requires a time commitment for you, there's a process, in order to declare it, and you can get official, confirmation that this is something that you can go ahead with. And, we see a lot of employees doing that, because that's also us as an organization encouraging people to, go ahead with their talents. Somebody who's into baking wants to start up something like that. It's something that helps them also balance that work and life piece as well. And it all goes back to the part which I mentioned before as well. The onus of that responsibility is on the employee. So they have a responsibility to ensure that whatever they do as a part of their personal, work doesn't affect their outcome or the quality in their delivery at, their work deliverable. So I think that is another area that organizations could give some guidance around it, but also, build that trust element with employees so that, they would be able to come back and check with someone to say, is this something which is okay for me to do? If I do engage with it, how can I go about it? To have those conversations with your line managers and be very open and transparent about it, and then, work towards delivering what you have set out as, KPIs or goals for yourself at a work in the work setting.
Agreed. Sometimes maybe the employee doesn't even know if they're actually breaking a rule or if they're doing any activity that's conflict of interest with the company, right? So since Ganaka spoke about the outcome, we have a question that I like to pose it to Ganaka from the audience. How do you go around performance review given the difficulty in achieving targets?
How do you go around the performance review? As in, how do you conduct a performance review?
I think it's about how do you conduct a performance review given the difficulty in achieving targets. Should they adjust the measurements, or how would they go around it?
And I feel like I keep saying this. Answers in between those two things, right? First of all, you can't get to the performance review and then look backwards and say, oh, how do I need to do things differently? You need to look forward. You have to actually tell your employees, this is how, your performance review is going to change, right? There is going to be certain different indicators that we need to look at to look at performance. But at the same time, there are the hard indicators such as sales targets, whatever that may be, that we need to continue to look at, revenue targets, customer targets, whatever they may be. I do think that it is only fair from when you look at an employee's perspective, as the person who wrote the question is indicating, that you accept that certain hard targets, the they may not be achievable, right? So you do have to adjust for that and actually communicate to your employees how you're going to think about that. It's not so much whether you take it up or down or sideways. It's more about communicating and coming with a common consensus that whatever changes and however differently you're going to conduct the review makes sense for both parties. That I think is critically important. And so very practically, if I take it back to McKinsey, we have adjusted and said, look, in the first half of this year, if you're a junior colleague, you may not have been on as many different teams as we would have liked to see or expected to. So we make an adjustment for that. On the other hand, we expect you to have done the same amount, if not more, of the kind of self-learning online modules that are available to you. So, we adjust certain indicators up, adjust other indicators down, and accept that the world has changed, right? Certain targets may no longer be possible.
True. I think you just answered one of the questions we just got as well. What tips would you give for people managers in terms of setting objectives for next year? So it's all about knowing, how the market conditions are and then setting it accordingly. Obviously, it has to be achievable also, right? We're all talking about, setting objectives and performances and all of that. How about the employee well-being aspect? We have a question, I think it's directly asked, pointed towards Shenail. So this is the question. LSEG is known for employee engagement and the emphasis on L&D. How can companies who don't have large budgets promote engagement effectively in this new norm? I think it's an interesting question. When companies have a lot of cuts in their budgets, this could be the last thing sometimes on their list. But from LSEG, I'm sure you all are blessed with a lot of budgets and doing a lot of things for engagement and well-being of the staff. So how can companies who don't have lavish budgets still could promote the engagement effectively in this new norm?
So yeah, that's actually a really good question. And I think surprisingly, although a lot of people think when you say engagement or when you say learning, that it has to be something that's a grand event that a lot is spent on. But what we've also learned over these last couple of months is the most engaging, initiatives do not need so much of a budget to be a part of it. Like some of the activities can be done without a single cent being spent, as long as you have some sort of technology platform that can enable it to connect with different people. So it's about encouraging people to bring out their talents. It could be somebody who's sort of, we had a couple of engagement activities like that where we encouraged employees who did have different talents to bring those out and share those with their relevant colleagues and team members. And that was also helping people's well-being to kind of have a break from work as well. So that can be something that companies can look at. It can be just a sing-along session, it can be a team building session. If you go on Google and you look at different icebreakers, there are 200, 250 or maybe 500 even different activities that can be done without spending a single cent. So I think it's about HR professionals kind of looking at those different alternatives and pushing ourselves also to look beyond, everything doesn't have to have a dollar value or a rupee value attached to it. It's about the outcome of how engaged and how connected people are feeling throughout that process. And on the L&D space itself, I mean, you don't have to have complicated LMS systems and all of that to have a learning culture within your organization, right? For a learning culture to be supported, the top management or the senior leadership needs to support the learning culture. The employees need to have the mindset of wanting to continuously learn. So you have so many free resources available. There are, platforms, different, sites that are providing these sort of e-learning opportunities like, the Udemy's and different other platforms. And a lot of universities actually provided some free resources during the lockdown periods, which are available online as well. You have TED Talks, you have different Harvard Business Reviews, and also learning from each other. So your senior leaders or your own colleagues sharing experiences on how they would have managed a difficult situation. The senior leaders probably giving inputs or insights into what the organization future looks like. All of those are learning. So learning is not being in a classroom, and learning, as we know, it's about the exposure, education, experience kind of model, which is used constantly as well. So I think HR professionals need to think out of the box as well a bit, and move away from thinking there needs to be a huge budget for me to do something, but just come up with some initiative, kind of do some branding around it and help it be something that employees can connect to, use social media platforms and different interesting ways to engage employees as well. And I think you can do a lot without even spending any money to some extent.
True. Thank you for covering the entire spectrum, Romani. I think you just gave a free handbook for all HR professionals as to how do you build engagement without a budget. So thank you for that. We've just have Romani Rupasinghe joining in, Head of Engineering, Swivel Group. Thank you, Romani, for joining with us. Though we are towards the end of the discussion, we've just we're talking about how companies can engage their employees even if they don't have huge budgets. Do you have anything to add to it, either Romani or Ganaka?
Hi, I'm very sorry for joining towards the latter part of the conversation. Technical difficulties, always pops up. Joining to the conversation, I think what have been discussing is, I believe, without having a huge budget, how to support for working from home, working from anywhere. Was that the conversation that was going on?
Yes, and how to have the engagement with the employees and about their well-being.
Right, yeah. So I think, especially coming from the IT sector, working from home and and the working from anywhere hasn't been completely a new topic for the knowledge working companies. So it has been very much a part of the culture in knowledge working companies compared to other industries. But it's a fact that as part of the pandemic during this early part of the year, these terminologies came into the picture very much. But when it comes to how to operate the model in a low cost environment, I think understanding the core essence of what we are trying to achieve by operating in a structure like working from home or working from anywhere is what it makes the most impact of it, I believe. Even from the organization perspective and even from the workforce perspective, both the sides needs to understand what we are trying to achieve by enabling such flexibilities in the work structures and work schedules. Then only both the parties will be able to achieve the business continuity. In a IT firm, usually the right or the correct infrastructure is already in place to support such kind of flexibility. But I believe in other industries, some level of investment has to happen to enable that. For an example, to support for remote working. So that's what I think from my perspective. Yeah.
Thank you, Romani. As much as I like to continue the conversation, we have arrived to the last couple of minutes. So let me ask one final question from all three panelists. What's the final takeaway of this subject, and one advice that you would like to give both employers and employees in this working from home or anywhere in this new era? Shall we start with Ganaka?
Sure. Let me try and be succinct. I think understand the true potential of working from home. It is immense, but be cognizant that both on the employee and the employee side, there are both cultural and structural changes that need to be put in place. for us to go from being good at what we're doing at the moment in terms of working from home to get into being great at it.
Shenail, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the key things which I would say is that this is an ever-changing kind of environment. So both as organizations and employees, I think we need to have that communication line and try to understand what levels of support as an organization we can give to employees. And from an employee perspective, how can we be responsible and take that ownership in terms of doing what we need to do in this environment. So I think having that connect from both ends and ensuring that we all understand that this situation, when we speak 3 months down the line, could change drastically even more. There could be another, sort of disruptor that comes through, and this could kind of get us to think totally differently. So I think we have to be open to that change as well, and course correct where needed and move forward positively. I think that's what I would say.
Thank you, Shenail. Romani, how about your final thoughts and a piece of advice to employers and employees?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, what I believe is that every organization has to be down the line, be flexible with the working model. I mean, we shouldn't be enforcing either too extreme of going towards working from home culture, or to be bounded to working from office. It'll be good to have a right balance between the two industries where this can be employed and used. So I mean, it's mostly about empowering an employee to choose and work where he or she most personally productive. Then only the right output of work can be delivered. And from employee perspective, I think like other two panelists mentioned, it's being empowered to make decision and being responsible in giving the right output to business continuity and achieving business objectives. And also from the employer's perspective, making the employee empowered by enabling to make the right decisions and getting the right output from the employees. So that's what I believe in. So I think I would more lenient towards to going ahead with a hybrid model than just to going ahead with either working from home or working from office.
Yes, and that brings to the end of the conversation. Thank you, Romani, Ganaka, and Shenail. Yes, like Romani said, it is a hybrid model in most of the companies now, and it's a responsibility of both employers and employees to put their effort, the right effort, to make this work in this new era. With that, we wrap up today's conversation of working from home to working from anywhere. We did touch on interesting topics today, from challenges, from risks, policies, well-being. I hope you've got some takeaway today. Before I hand over to Anton, I would like to thank Ganaka, Romani, and Shenail for being interesting panelists, for sharing your experiences with us today, and for everyone who joined. Stay safe and have a blessed day. Over to you, Anton.
Thank you, Zafrana, for steering this conversation so well. Once again, Romani, Ganaka, and Shenail, thank you very, very much. I guess the question and thoughts for everyone, as Zafrana brought out, is while this working from anywhere, the model offers notable benefits to companies and their employees, the question, I guess, is, are all remote or majority remote organizations the future of knowledge work? Is work from anywhere, or WFA, is that here to stay? On that note, a quick thank you also to H1, our technology partners, for the 3rd season running. Coming up in the next hour of This, That, and the Other, Season 2 with Varun. Do join in, and they are discussing this afternoon the good, bad, and the ugly of yet another controversial topic. And today, they're dissecting MBAs and DBAs in the corporate world. Requirement or adornment? On that note, enjoy the rest of the day. Stay safe, stay productive.